A letter can change a life, or it can be torn in half before the dream even breathes. Nia Coleman was 19 when the world reminded her what it meant to be powerless. She was black, brilliant, and burning with ambition. Her father had taught her that the law could be a sword for the poor. She believed him. Until the day she stood in the kitchen of their cramped Crescent City apartment, clutching a thick envelope with her name printed in bold. Type, admission granted, Crescent City School of Law. Her hands shook. As she opened it, every word felt like light. Every sentence carried her. Father's voice. You will defend those who cannot defend themselves. She ran to the small living room. Velma Price sat there. Her stepmother of barely 2 years. Velma's nails were sharp, painted gold. Clinking against the keys of a calculator, stacks of receipts and pawn slips surrounded her like trophies. Velma! Nia gasped. I got in! Full admission, law school. Dad's dream, our dream, it's happening. Velma looked up, her eyes cold, calculating. Law school? She said flatly. Who is going to pay the rent while you play with books? Nia's smile faltered. It's a scholarship. I just need money for books and… Velma's hand darted out. She snatched the envelope. For a moment, she scanned the lines, her lips curling, then rip. The sound was surgical. The letter split clean down the middle. Nia gasped, reaching forward. But Velma's fingers were already shredding the halves into quarters. The pieces fluttered to the floor like broken wings. You think law feeds this house? Velma hissed. Law doesn't pay electric bills. Law doesn't cover funeral debt. Your father's shop is drowning in red ink, and you think I'll waste coins on your little fantasy? Nia's throat tightened. That was Dad's dream for me. He wanted me to be… Your father is dead, Velma cut in, her voice like steel. And the dead don't pay rent. Silence thickened in the room. Nia bent to gather the torn pieces, her hands trembling. Velma watched her, eyes sharp with satisfaction. From tomorrow, Velma said, rising from her chair, you will work where I tell you. The Rivera diner needs dishwashers. They pay little, but at least you'll earn your salt. Nia's heart cracked. From law student to dishwasher, from courtroom to kitchen sink. That night, she lay awake, the scraps of her admission letter under her pillow. She whispered into the dark, Daddy, I promised you, I won't give up. I won't. But the promise felt smaller than Velma's shadow. The next morning, the Rivera diner swallowed her whole. The kitchen was a furnace of steam and grease. Stacks of plates towered like walls. The sink overflowed with oil. Bones, half-eaten food. The manager tossed her a ragged apron and barked, Move faster or drown. By noon, her hands were raw. Detergent burned her skin. Steam fogged her eyes. Cooks shouted orders. Waitresses slammed trays on the counter. To them, she wasn't Nia Coleman. She was Dish Girl. When she dropped a glass, laughter echoed through the kitchen. Careful. Lawyer, one cook sneered. Don't sue us with your fancy dreams. Nia bit her lip, blinked back tears, and scrubbed harder. Every scrape of the sponge against porcelain felt like humiliation, but she kept moving. Because stopping meant drowning. Because dignity, her father once said, is what you hold when everything else is taken. At closing time, she dragged bags of trash to the alley. The city smelled of diesel, smoke, and despair. She leaned against the dumpster, too tired to cry. That was when she saw him, a man in a battered wheelchair, parked near the curb. His clothes were worn, his cap pulled low, his legs hidden beneath a frayed blanket. He looked like a beggar, a man forgotten by time. Their eyes met. For a moment, Nia felt the weight of his gaze, calm, steady, strangely knowing. She straightened, forcing a smile. Good evening. Sir, the words slipped out naturally. Not mockery, not pity, respect. The man tipped his cap slightly, but said nothing. Nia hesitated, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out half a sandwich she had saved from the diner's waste bin. Here, she said softly. It's not much, but it's dinner. The man took it, his hand surprisingly steady. Thank you, he said. his voice low but clear, and for the first time that day, Nia felt human again. She returned home past midnight. Velma was waiting, arms crossed, lips pursed. "You smell like grease," Velma said with disdain. "Good. Remember that smell. It's the smell of reality." Nia's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to fight, to throw the scraps of her shredded letter at Velma's feet. But she stayed silent, because tomorrow meant another shift, another mountain of dishes, another alley where perhaps, just perhaps, the man in the wheelchair would be waiting, and she wondered, who was he really? If the world stripped you of every dream, would you still find the strength to respect a stranger? The city never sleeps, but some corners of it never wake. For Nia Coleman, those corners smelled like bleach, grease, and despair. The Rivera Diner was open 24 hours, and Nia had the closing shift again. The manager barked orders like a drill sergeant, while cooks cursed and slammed pans against iron stoves. Steam rose, heavy and wet, clouding the single window that looked out onto the alley. Nia stood at the sink, hands raw and red, submerged in water that never seemed clean. Plates clattered in an endless rhythm. Her reflection in the steel faucet barely looked human. Eyes tired, face damp with sweat, apron stained with oil. Every now and then a server tossed in another pile of dishes. Faster. "Dish girl," one sneered. "You're not here to dream. You're here to scrub." She bit back a reply. Words felt like luxuries she couldn't afford. Hours bled together. The smell of fried onions clung to her skin. Her back ached from standing. Her shoulders burned from scrubbing. This wasn't work. It was erasure, a systematic grinding down of who she was, who she wanted to be. But inside, a flicker survived. Every time she dipped her hands into the sink, she whispered a silent promise. This is not the end. Near midnight, the diner emptied. Chairs were flipped onto tables. Lights dimmed. Nia hauled black bags of trash toward the back alley. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, but she welcomed the cool night air. It was the only breath of freedom she had, and then she saw him again. The same man in the battered wheelchair, parked beneath a broken street lamp, half in shadow, his cap low, his blanket drawn up. A figure the world had chosen not to see. For a moment she froze. Why was he always there when she stepped outside? Coincidence, or something else? She set the trash bags down and wiped her hands on her apron. "Evening, sir," she said, her voice weary but respectful. He looked up. A glint of surprise crossed his eyes, then faded into calm. "Not many people call me that," he murmured. "Then they should learn manners," Nia replied, almost sharply. He chuckled softly. "You sound like someone who believes respect is a law." "Not a choice." Nia blinked. "Law." The word stung like salt on a wound. She hesitated, then pulled a sandwich wrapper from her pocket. She had saved half of her meager dinner again. "Here," she said, extending it toward him. "Better in your hands than in the trash." He accepted it, but his eyes never left hers. "You work too. Hard for too little," he said. "You don't belong in that." "Kitchen." Nia swallowed hard, her throat burned with words she dared not speak. Belonging. "Doesn't pay rent," the man studied her. Silent. Then he nodded slowly, as though filing away her answer. The sound of heels clicking against pavement broke the moment. Velma appeared at the end of the alley, dressed in a silk blouse that did not match the hour. Her gold nails caught the weak light, tapping against her phone. "So this is where you hide," Velma said, her tone dripping disdain. "Talking to beggars while real people handle real business." Nia stiffened. "This man has more dignity than—" "Silence!" Velma snapped. "You think your father left you dreams? He left me debts. And tomorrow you will repay them the way I decide." Nia clenched her fists, heart hammering. "What do you mean?" Velma's lips curled into a smile that felt like poison. "There is a man who wants a wife. Crippled, yes. Poor, yes. But he will take you, and once you're gone, I will finally have peace." Nia's chest constricted. Her mind screamed, "No! but her voice barely whispered, "You can't! You can't do this!" Velma leaned close, eyes burning. "You will stand where I place you. You will marry who I choose, and you will thank me when it's done." The man in the wheelchair sat silently, watching. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost detached, but in his eyes flickered something sharp. A storm. Waiting. Velma turned on her heel, heels striking the pavement like a gavel. "Tomorrow," she said, without looking back. "Tomorrow you learn your place." The alley was silent again. Nia stared at the man in the chair, tears pricking her eyes. He met her gaze. Steady, unwavering. "Sir," she whispered, "what would you do if someone tried to bury you alive?" He adjusted his cap, his voice low. "Sometimes being buried is how seeds learn to rise." She shivered. Not sure if it was wisdom or warning. Before she could reply, he turned his chair and rolled into the shadows. Nia stood alone in the alley, heart trembling, destiny tightening its grip. "Tomorrow." The word echoed like a sentence. The morning of the wedding felt nothing like a wedding. It felt like a sentence. Nia stood before the cracked mirror. In her tiny room, the walls still smelled faintly of her father's leather tools. Long since sold by Velma, she wore a faded white dress borrowed from a neighbor. The fabric was thin, the lace yellowed. Her hands shook as she pinned it together with trembling fingers. Velma hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, lips twisted. "You had better look grateful," she sneered. "Do you know how many girls would kill for a husband, crippled or not? You should thank me." Nia's eyes burned, but she said nothing. What words could possibly fight a cage? By 9 o'clock, the small parish on Dauphine Street was filled, not with friends or family, Nia had none left, but with neighbors eager for spectacle. Children whispered, "Dish girl bride." Men shook their heads with false pity. Women snickered behind raised hands. The priest adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. It was no grand ceremony. No flowers, no choir, only peeling paint and creaking benches. Then the groom rolled in, the man from the alley, the one Nia had called Sir, the one who had eaten half a sandwich in silence. His cap still shadowed his eyes, his clothes shabby, his chair battered. He looked every bit the beggar Velma had promised. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nia's heart sank. So this was her fate, to be bound forever. To a man as trapped as she was, the priest began. "Do you, Elias Kane?" "Take this woman." "I do," the man said firmly, his voice steady and clear. "And do you, Nia Coleman?" Her lips trembled. She thought of her father's voice. The letter shredded, the dishes piled high. Velma's gold nails cutting through her life. She thought of the man beside her. Poor and broken, but the only soul who had ever looked at her with quiet respect. "I do," she whispered. Laughter erupted in the pews. "Dish girl and beggar," someone shouted. Phones lifted, recording. Children chanted, "Dish girl bride! Dish girl bride!" Velma sat in the front, her smile wide with triumph. "At last," she whispered to her friend, "now she will suffer, and I will have peace." The rings were plain, silver, almost dull. No music followed, no applause, just the whispers of mockery. When the ceremony ended, Nia stepped into the blazing sunlight. Her head was bowed, her heart heavy. But beside her, Elias leaned slightly and murmured, "Keep your head high, my wife. A lioness does not answer to dogs." Nia swallowed hard, lifted her chin, and tried to walk with dignity. Even in chains, she thought, one can walk straight. Then it happened. A low rumble shook the street. Engines, heavy, smooth. Heads turned. Around the corner rolled 5 black SUVs, paint gleaming like obsidian under the sun. They slowed, forming a line before the church. Tinted windows reflected the stunned faces of neighbors. Doors opened. Uniformed drivers stepped out. Crisp and polished, moving with military precision. One of them approached, bowed low before the man in the wheelchair. "Mr. Kane," he said respectfully, voice ringing. "We are ready." The street froze. Gasps erupted. Phones dropped. Velma's triumphant smile collapsed into confusion. Nia's breath caught. She stared at the man in the chair. Her mind a storm, sir. What is happening?
Who are you?
Elias lifted his cap slightly, revealing eyes calm as steel. He smiled faintly. Shall we go home, my love? The driver bent, lifting him gently from the battered chair into the back of the lead SUV. Another driver opened the opposite door for Nia. Madam, he said with a bow. Nia's knees weakened. She stumbled, her hands trembling. Madam, she whispered. The crowd roared with questions. Who is he?
Isn't he a beggar?
What kind of beggar has a convoy? Velma stood rooted to the ground, her hands shaking, her face pale. No, she muttered. This isn't possible. But it was happening. Before her eyes, the daughter she had condemned was being escorted into a world she could not touch. Nia slid into the SUV, the leather cool beneath her palms. The door shut with a solid thud. The noise of the mocking crowd vanished, replaced with silence. Her chest heaved. Her life had just split in two. Before and after. What would you do if the beggar you were forced to marry turned out to be the man the entire city already feared, already respected, and already obeyed? The ride was silent, but silence had never been so loud. Nia sat stiffly in the back of the SUV, palms pressed against smooth black leather. Every turn of the convoy made her heart pound harder. Through the tinted glass, Crescent City passed in fragments. Graffiti walls, neon diners, boarded storefronts. The same city that had mocked her now stared in shock as the fleet of black vehicles rolled by. Beside her, Elias sat calm, almost serene, his eyes half closed as if this were routine. Routine for a beggar? Nia's throat ached with questions, but the only word that escaped was a whisper. Who are you? Elias turned his head slightly, his gaze steady. Patience, my love. You will see. She clenched her fists. I thought you were a man with nothing. I was ready to suffer with you. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and power. And that is why you are here. The convoy left the crowded streets, merging onto a wide boulevard lined with tall trees. Soon the broken sidewalks and rusted fences gave way to gated estates. Each house was larger than anything Nia had ever seen. Columns, fountains, manicured lawns. Her breath caught. This can't be for us, she muttered. The SUVs slowed before a massive black iron gate. Guards in uniform snapped to attention, saluting as the convoy approached. Without a word, the gates swung open. Nia's eyes widened. The mansion before her seemed unreal. Marble walls glowing in the afternoon sun. Glass windows soaring high, a fountain spraying crystal arcs of water. Luxury cars lined the driveway like soldiers on parade, and at the foot of the steps, a row of staff waited in neat uniforms, heads bowed. The SUV stopped. A driver opened the door. Welcome home. Madam. Nia froze. Her feet refused to move. This is impossible. Elias was lifted gently from the SUV into a polished wheelchair. He wheeled closer, his presence suddenly commanding. No longer the silent beggar of the alley. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. Welcome to my home. Welcome to my empire. Nia's knees trembled. Empire? He nodded once. The world knows me as Elias Kane, founder of Kane Logistics, owner of half the docks you walked past as a child, a man they once feared, until an accident left me in this chair. Her mouth fell open. A billionaire, so they say, Elias murmured. But wealth is nothing when you lose what people think makes you whole. Nia swallowed hard. Then why? Why disguise yourself as a beggar? His eyes softened. When I had everything, I discovered people saw only the wealth, not the man. And when the accident took my legs, the woman I loved abandoned me. So I chose to walk, to roll, among the people unseen. To find one heart that valued dignity above riches. He leaned closer, his tone steady. You gave me bread, not because you knew my name, not because of wealth, because you saw a man, not a chair. That day, I knew. Nia covered her mouth, shaking her head. Tears filled her eyes, hot and unrelenting. I thought I was marrying misery. I thought my life was over. Elias reached for her hand, strong despite the years of silence he had endured. You did not marry misery. You married truth. And truth, Nia, is the foundation of every empire. Her tears spilled. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of hope she thought she had buried with her father. For the first time since the letter was torn, she felt destiny stir again. That night, servants laid a meal of silver trays and crystal glasses. Nia sat at the long dining table, unable to eat, staring at the reflection of herself in polished surfaces, a dishwasher, now called Madam. But even as abundance surrounded her, she whispered a silent promise into the dark. I will not let wealth blind me. I will remember the sink, the grease, the mockery, and I will remember that respect is a law, not a choice. Elias, watching her, said quietly, You are not here because of my fortune. You are here because you carried dignity when the world tried to strip it from you. Nia lifted her chin, eyes burning with resolve. And I will carry it still. If dignity can lift someone from a kitchen sink to the halls of power, what might it do for those who still wait in the shadows? The return was not for celebration, it was for reckoning. 3 weeks after the wedding, Crescent City had grown restless with rumors. Videos of the black SUVs leaving the church still circled online. Dish girl marries billionaire? Beggar turns kingpin? Everyone speculated, but no one knew the truth. Elias Kane knew exactly what he was doing. And Nia Coleman, still adjusting to the marble halls of his empire, asked him one evening on the balcony, Why go back?
Why face her?
His eyes glimmered with quiet. Resolve. Because dignity is not complete until it looks its oppressor in the eye. The convoy rolled, once more through the narrow streets where Nia had carried trash bags and Velma had sharpened her cruelty. Neighbors poured from their houses, eyes wide. Phones raised. Children who once mocked her as dish girl now fell silent, all replacing laughter. Velma Price stumbled out of her doorway, her silk scarf slipping, her face drained of color. Her hands fluttered nervously as the SUV stopped in front of her. The driver stepped out, opened the door, and bowed. Madame, Nia descended slowly, dressed not in jewels but in a simple gown of white cotton, head held high. Elias followed, wheeled down with care, his presence commanding. The crowd hushed. Nia's voice was steady. Good afternoon, Madam Price. Velma forced a smile, her words sticky. My daughter, my in-law. God has blessed us indeed. The neighbors snickered. They remembered every insult, every slap of words Velma had thrown at Nia. They had not forgotten her pride. Nia stepped closer, her gaze sharp. You said my father left debts. You said I was worthless. You forced me into a kitchen sink and called it my destiny. Velma's smile cracked. I didn't know. If I had known he was a great man. Elias cut her off, his voice sharp as a gavel. And if I were only a beggar? Would her life have been less valuable then? The crowd murmured, nodding, some clapping softly. Velma's eyes darted, desperate. Nia, forgive me. I was only trying to survive. Nia's chest heaved, memories burning. The shredded letter, the grease and steam, the taunts of dish girl. Her voice cut through the air. No. You were trying to profit. You stole my father's shop. You stole his dream, and you tried to bury me because dignity made you jealous. Velma collapsed to her knees in the dust, clutching Nia's hands. Please, my daughter, take me in. Let me serve you. I will wash your clothes, scrub your floors. Nia pulled her hands free. I don't need a maid. I don't need revenge. What I needed was freedom, and I have it. She turned, took Elias's hand. Let's go, my husband. The crowd parted. Whispers rising. She dug her own grave with greed. Justice has found her. As the convoy pulled away, Velma remained on her knees, her cries echoing down the street. That night, In the mansion's quiet study, Nia sat beside Elias, her voice low. I should feel satisfied. But I don't. Not yet. Why? Elias asked gently. Because tearing a letter is more than cruelty. It's a crime. And if she forged papers to steal my father's shop, her eyes hardened. Then she belongs not just in shame, but in court. Elias nodded, a faint smile of approval crossing his lips. My lioness, dignity is strongest when paired with law. What happens when cruelty isn't just a private sin, but a public crime waiting to be exposed? Velma Price believed humiliation was the worst punishment, but humiliation was only the beginning. Days after the confrontation in Crescent City, whispers spread like wildfire. One knew who had sent anonymous documents to the authorities, documents showing that Velma had signed Harold Coleman's name on contracts after his death, contracts that mortgaged the old shoe shop, drained its accounts, and funneled cash into shadow lenders. It was fraud, plain, simple, and now undeniable. The knock came at dawn. Velma staggered to the door, her scarf loose, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Two men in dark suits stood on the porch, badges raised. Internal Revenue Service, one said calmly. Ma'am, we have questions about your filings. Behind them, neighbors gathered quickly. Word spread faster than fire in dry grass. They watched as Velma's hands shook, clutching at her robe. There must be a mistake, she stammered. I'm a widow. I only did what I had to. Ma'am, the agent cut in firmly. Forging a dead man's signature is not survival. It's a felony. Gasps rippled through the street. Phones lifted, everyone recording, everyone remembering. Velma's knees buckled. For the first time, her power, her money, meant nothing. Across town, Nia sat beside Elias in his study. Stacks of folders covered the desk. Evidence gathered by his legal team. He slid one toward her. Here, Elias said. Proof of the liens she filed, proof of the fake accounts. It's airtight. Nia stared at the papers, her hands trembling. This is more than betrayal. It's theft of my father's legacy. Elias's eyes narrowed. And theft of dignity. That is what law exists to confront. He leaned back, his tone sharpened. But Velma is not acting alone. Look here. He tapped a second file. Payments from her account, directed to men tied to the Port Authority. My rivals. Nia's chest tightened. She sold me to them. She sold everything to them. Yes, Elias said, voice low, and they want more. They think I am weak. They think marrying you was my mistake. They do not realize. His eyes locked on hers. You are my shield, not my weakness. Nia exhaled slowly. Then we fight. Not with fists, not with fear. With law. That evening, the news broke. Local widow under federal investigation. Screens filled with Velma's face, pale and broken. Clips replayed the IRS agents at her door, the neighbors whispering, the words felony fraud. At the diner where Nia had once scrubbed dishes, the staff huddled around a flickering TV. Is that the lady who forced Dish Girl to marry the cripple? One asked. Not cripple, another corrected. Billionaire. And she, he pointed at the screen, is going down. Velma sat alone in her living room, curtains drawn, phone buzzing non-stop. The community that once feared her now mocked her. Her friends abandoned her. Creditors called every hour. And still, she muttered to herself, this can't be happening. This can't, but it was happening, and it was only the beginning. At the mansion, Nia stood on the balcony, city lights flickering below. Elias wheeled beside her. Silent, watchful, she whispered, is it wrong that I feel relief? No, he answered firmly. It is justice beginning its slow walk. Nia nodded, her eyes fierce. Then let it walk faster. The courthouse smelled of oak and old battles. Its marble floors echoed with the steps of lawyers. Journalists and curious strangers drawn by scandal. Velma Price versus the state of Louisiana. That was the headline splashed across every newspaper, every screen. But for Nia Coleman, it was more than headlines. It was the moment to reclaim her father's name. The courtroom was crowded, air buzzing with whispers. Velma sat at the defendant's table, her once polished nails chipped, her silk replaced by a wrinkled suit. She looked smaller now, swallowed by the weight of the law. Nia entered quietly, her hair braided neatly, her simple navy dress a deliberate choice. Not wealth, not glamour, only dignity. When the whispers spread, "Dish girl, here." She lifted her chin higher. Yes, she was the dishwasher they mocked. Yes, she had worn grease on her skin like armor, and yes, she was still here. Elias sat behind her, a silent force, his presence radiating calm power. The judge called order. The state prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, we present evidence that Velma Price knowingly forged Harold Coleman's signature after his death, mortgaged his property, and embezzled funds for personal gain. Documents were displayed on the projector, contracts with Harold's shaky name, dated weeks after his funeral, bank transfers traced to shell accounts." Velma shifted uneasily, sweat beading on her forehead. The prosecutor continued. "And we will prove that when her stepdaughter, Nia Coleman, received her university admission letter, Velma destroyed it to ensure she remained powerless, so Velma alone could control the estate." A gasp swept the courtroom. The judge raised a brow. "Admission letter?" Nia's breath caught. It was time. The prosecutor turned. "Miss Coleman." "Please take the stand." Nia walked forward, every step steady though her heart pounded. She raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat. The prosecutor's voice softened. "Nia, can you tell the court what happened the day you received your letter?" Nia's throat tightened. She forced herself to meet the jury's eyes. "I opened the envelope," she said quietly. "It was from Louisiana State University. I had been accepted to study law. It was my father's dream. His last words to me were, 'Promise me you will go to school.'" Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "When I showed Velma, she tore the letter in half. She said, 'Law won't put food on my table. You belong in a kitchen sink, not in a classroom.'" A ripple of shock moved through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some jurors exchanged grim looks. Nia lifted her chin, her voice rising. "She didn't just tear paper. She tore at my future. She tried to bury me in grease and shame. But I stand here because a torn letter is not a torn future." The room fell into silence. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. As though struck, Velma's lawyer rose quickly, trying to object. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The letter is not relevant to financial fraud, but the judge's gavel cut through the protest. Sit down. This court will hear her." Nia's eyes stayed locked on Velma. "For years, she made me wash dishes while she stole my father's legacy. She called me worthless. She called me liability. But today, I am here to remind her, dignity cannot be stolen." Her words landed like thunder. Velma dropped her gaze, trembling. Elias's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair. He whispered under his breath, so only those near him could hear, "My lioness." What happens when the very girl a villain tried to silence becomes the witness whose voice seals their fate? Velma Price had built her entire life on performance, silk blouses, polished nails, the illusion of control. But under oath, illusions collapse. The prosecutor circled her like a wolf. "Mrs. Price, do you recognize these documents?" Velma adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling. "Yes, but is this your signature?" Her lips pressed thin. "Yes. And yet the date is 3 weeks after Harold Coleman was buried. Care to explain how the dead signed contracts?" Laughter rippled in the gallery until the judge's gavel struck. Velma's face flushed deep red. I only did what was necessary. We had bills, debts. I was desperate." The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Desperate enough to forge a man's name? Desperate enough to rob his daughter of her inheritance? Desperate enough to tear apart her future so you could control the money?" Velma flinched. She was ungrateful. She didn't understand real life. She thought dreams paid rent. The prosecutor pounced. "So you admit tearing her acceptance letter?" Velma froze. The silence in the courtroom stretched like a blade. Finally, her voice cracked. "Yes, I tore it. Because I knew she'd waste everything chasing a fantasy. A gasp swept through the crowd. Journalists. Pens flew across paper. Cameras clicked furiously. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard it from her own mouth. She tore a young woman's chance at education. She forged a dead man's name. She embezzled funds. This is not survival. This is exploitation, Velma's lawyer scrambled. Objection! She was under financial strain. The judge's glare silenced him, overruled. Sit down. Velma's shoulders sagged, her mask cracked, exposing the raw greed beneath. Outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. News vans lined the street, anchors broadcasting live. Velma Price, widow of Harold Coleman, admitted under oath to destroying her stepdaughter's law school acceptance letter. Community outrage is mounting. Clips of Nia on the stand replayed on loop. Her words, "A torn letter is not a torn future," trended across social media. Torn letter rose to the top of hashtags, a rallying cry for anyone whose dreams had been mocked. At the Rivera Diner, dishwashers paused mid-shift to watch the small TV above the counter. That's her, one said softly. Our dish girl. She's not scrubbing plates anymore. Another nodded, pride swelling in his voice. She's showing the whole world what dignity looks like. Back inside, Nia sat beside Elias during recess. Her hands trembled slightly, adrenaline fading. Was it enough? She whispered. Elias leaned closer, his voice low but firm. More than enough. Today you did what the law is meant to do. You made the truth undeniable, she exhaled, her chest tight, but lighter than it had ever been. When court resumed, Velma tried one last plea. Tears streaked her cheeks. I only wanted to survive. I lost my husband. I had nothing. What would you have done? The prosecutor's reply was ice. What I would not have done is destroy a child's future for profit. The jury's eyes hardened. There was no sympathy left. As the session ended, reporters swarmed the steps. Nia! Nia! Do you have a statement? She paused, the cameras flashing, microphones pressing forward. Her voice was clear, carrying over the chaos. My stepmother tore a letter, but she did not tear me. She tried to bury me in shame. But shame is not a grave, it is soil. And from soil, we rise. The crowd erupted. Some clapped, some shouted, Amen! Others simply wept. And as she walked down the courthouse steps, Elias wheeling beside her, Nia felt the world shift. No longer dish girl, no longer orphan, but witness, survivor, warrior. Justice in court was only the first battle. The war waited outside. The morning after Velma's confession, headlines screamed her downfall. Widow exposed, forgery trial shakes, Crescent City. For most, it was victory. For Elias Kane, it was a warning. In the mansion's study, the blinds were drawn. The air heavy. Stacks of files lay open across the desk. Maps of shipping routes, lists of investors. Elias wheeled forward, his jaw tight. They are circling, he murmured. Nia stood beside him. Her arms crossed, brow furrowed. Who? He slid a folder toward her. Inside were grainy photographs. Men in tailored suits, sitting in cafes. Their faces shadowed but recognizable. My rivals, Elias said. The ones who waited for me to fall after the accident. They fed Velma money, used her as a pawn. Now that she's exposed, they won't stop. They'll come directly. Nia's stomach twisted. You mean they'll come after you? Elias's gaze hardened. Not just me, us. They saw your testimony. They know you're not just a witness, you're a symbol. And symbols are dangerous to men who build their empires on fear. That night, the first strike came. A guard burst into the dining hall, his uniform torn. Sir! Madam! We found one of the junior drivers at the back gate. He was paid to open it. Paid in cash. $10,000. Nia's fork clattered onto her plate. Another betrayal? Elias's voice was cold. Bring him in. Moments later, a young man was dragged into the hall, pale and trembling. Please, Olga, forgive me, he sobbed. They said no one would get hurt. They just wanted access. They promised me more money than I'd ever see. Elias's eyes burned, but his tone stayed measured. Who paid you? The driver hesitated, then whispered a name. Kamsi. Nia's pulse froze. Kamsi. Your ex-fiancé? Elias nodded slowly, grief flickering before resolve hardened again. Yes. The woman who abandoned me when I lost my legs. She's back. And now she wants everything. The betrayal cut deeper than steel. Nia clenched her fists. She left you broken, and now she wants to finish what she started? Elias leaned forward in his chair, his voice ablade. She thinks I am weaker now. She thinks wealth in a wheelchair is not power. But she underestimates the law, and she underestimates you. Nia met his gaze, her heart steady despite the storm outside. Then we fight together. She will not bury us. 2 days later, whispers reached the press. Kane Empire facing collapse. Enemies closing in on Crescent City's richest cripple. At the charity gala, cameras swarmed. Reporters fired questions like bullets. Mr. Kane, are you losing control of your empire? Mrs. Coleman, how does it feel to be married to a man in decline? Nia stepped forward, her eyes blazing. My husband is not defined by a wheelchair. He is defined by vision, courage, and law. And as for me, she paused, the room silent, cameras flashing. I am not ashamed. I am honored. Gasps filled the hall. Some reporters lowered their microphones. Stunned, others clapped from across the room. A figure watched, Kamsi, Elias's former love. Now dressed in designer silk, her new partner smirking at her side. Their smiles vanished, replaced with fury. Elias leaned toward Nia, whispering, my lioness. Tonight you've opened the gate they tried to close. By morning, clips of Nia's words had gone viral. Dishwasher to queen, wife defends billionaire with fiery speech. Investors who had doubted began to call back. The tide, once threatening to drown them, began to turn. But shadows still lingered. In a dim office across town, Kamsi slammed her fist onto a desk. She dares speak like that? She thinks she's untouchable? Her lover leaned close, voice dripping venom. Then let's prove her wrong. When betrayal walks through the front gate wearing a familiar face, what armor can even dignity provide? Whispers spread faster than fire in dry grass. By the third week, the city was buzzing with rumors. Kane Empire, a house of cards? Secret debts about to surface? Investors fleeing while rivals close in? The source was clear. Kamsi, the woman who had once promised Elias forever, then vanished when the wheelchair appeared. Now she was back. Her hand entwined with that of Victor Langston, a rival businessman who had envied Elias for years. In a smoky downtown cafe, their plot unfolded. They think he's strong because of her, Victor sneered, tapping a news article on his phone. Nia's face stared back, eyes blazing in mid-speech. They've made her the symbol, the lioness. So we cut the lioness down and the empire crumbles. Kamsi smirked, her gold bracelets clinking. She was a dishwasher. I'll remind the world of that. I'll remind them she married a cripple for money. And when the shame spreads, no investor will trust them again. Victor leaned back, satisfied. Then the throne is ours. Back at the mansion, Elias's chief of security laid a folder on his desk. Inside, intercepted messages, leaked documents, doctored photographs, all part of a smear campaign designed to paint Elias as a fraud and Nia as a gold digger. Nia scanned the pages, her stomach tightening. They want to bury us in the court of public opinion. Elias's eyes narrowed. They are using the same weapon Velma used. Shame. Nia slammed the folder. Shut! Then we fight it the same way. Not with silence, not with fear, with truth. The next blow came swiftly. A popular tabloid ran a headline in red, Dish Girl turned gold digger, the truth about Nia Coleman. Photos showed her in a greasy apron, arms deep in dishwater, juxtaposed with images of her stepping from the black SUV in silk. The captions dripped with poison. She married money, not love. She plays queen, but she's just a dishwasher in disguise. Online, trolls erupted. She's fake. She's lucky. She's no lioness, just a leech. For a moment, the tide turned. Investors hesitated again. The stock price of Kane Logistics dipped. Elias sat in silence. His jaw clenched. Nia's phone buzzed with notifications, each one sharper than a knife. She closed her eyes, whispering, "This is Velma all over again. Mockery, lies, shame." Then she opened them, her gaze like fire. But they forgot something. Shame is not a grave, it is soil. 2 nights later, Elias and Nia walked into the Crescent City Charity Gala, an event crawling with cameras, senators, CEOs, and every rival waiting for weakness. The moment they entered, reporters surged. "Mrs. Kane, are you ashamed of your past? Did you marry him for his fortune? Do you deny you were just a dishwasher?" Nia smiled faintly, her posture regal. She waited until the room hushed, cameras poised. Then she spoke. "Yes, I was a dishwasher. I scrubbed grease until my hands cracked. I carried shame like a second skin. But dignity is not about where you start. It's about refusing to let mockery define where you end." The hall froze. Reporters lowered their mics, some even. Clapped, she raised her chin higher. "I did not marry a fortune. I married a man the world mocked, and I was ready to suffer with him. And now I stand with him, not in shame, but in honor." Gasps filled the room. Victor's smirk faded. Kamsi's jaw tightened, fury boiling behind her painted smile. Elias leaned closer, whispering so only she could hear, "My lioness, tonight you've won the court they thought they controlled." By dawn, clips of Nia's speech had gone viral. Headlines shifted overnight. From dishwasher to queen, Nia Kane shuts down trolls with fiery words. The smear campaign backfired, turning her past into proof of resilience. Investors who had hesitated called back. The stock price stabilized, and for the first time, Victor and Kamsi realized they had underestimated not just Elias, but the woman beside him. Across the city, in their glass office tower, Victor slammed his fist against the desk. "She flipped it on us. She turned shame into power." Kamsi's eyes narrowed, venomous. "Then we stop playing games. If words won't bury them, we use something stronger." What happens when enemies who fail to kill your name decide to come for your very life? Night cloaked the mansion in uneasy silence. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but inside the estate, shadows gathered in corners where even chandeliers could not reach. Nia Coleman had begun to sleep lightly, every creak of the floorboards pulling her awake. Her instincts whispered, "Danger is near." And she was right. At 2 a.m., the first signal came. The security cameras at the back gate flickered, static buzzing across the screens. Then, silence. A minute later, a soft click echoed through the hall, the unmistakable sound of a door easing open. Nia sat up in bed. Heart hammering, she slipped from the sheets, padding barefoot into the corridor. From the study, she saw a sliver of light and a shadow moving inside. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Elias." He wheeled up beside her, calm even in darkness. He pressed a button on his chair. Instantly, emergency lights glowed faintly through the mansion. Boots thundered as guards rushed. Shouts echoed. Moments later, 2 men dragged a figure into the study, a young face, pale, trembling. Nia gasped. "Marcus? You drive us every morning!" The boy's knees buckled. "Madam, forgive me," he sobbed. "They promised me 10 million if I opened the gate tonight. I swear I didn't know they meant to kill." Elias's gaze cut like steel. "Who sent you?" Marcus shook, tears streaking his cheeks. It was Kamsi and Victor. They said you had lived long enough." The room stilled. Even the guards froze at the name. Nia's stomach turned, rage rising like fire. "She betrayed you once with abandonment. Now she wants your blood?" Marcus wept harder. "They said you'd never suspect me, that a driver is invisible. Please, Olga, have mercy." Elias raised his hand. "Take him to the authorities. No beating. Let the law judge him." The guards dragged Marcus away, his cries fading into the night. Silence returned, heavy as iron. Nia turned to Elias, her voice shaking with fury. "She left you broken, Elias, and now she wants you buried. How long before she strikes again?" He looked at her, calm but grim. "As long as greed breathes, it will strike. But hear me, violence is their weapon, not ours. Ours is truth. Ours is law. Nia clenched her fists, her heart a storm. Then teach me. Teach me how to fight with law, because I will not watch you suffer again. Elias reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You are stronger than you know. Tonight proves it. By morning, the newspapers exploded. Billionaire's estate breached. Insider paid to betray Elias Kane. Blogs speculated wildly who wanted him dead, who would profit from his fall. But inside the mansion, Nia stood before the staff, her voice ringing with command. This house is no longer a home for betrayal. If you are loyal, you stay. If not, leave now. Better to walk away than sell your soul for 30 pieces of silver. Not one moved. Every head bowed, every voice murmured, Loyal, madam, loyal. For the first time, the household knew Nia was not just a guest of fortune, she was the spine of the empire. That night, Elias whispered to her under the low glow of a lamp. They wanted to bury me, but what they forget is this: buried seeds grow. And with you beside me, Nia, we will rise higher than ever before. Her eyes gleamed with fire. Then let's rise and let the whole city watch. Morning came with thunder, not from the sky, but from the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward like spears. Headlines screamed, Kane Empire under fire. Was the charity queen once a dishwasher? The smear campaign had reached its crescendo. Inside the marble courthouse, the hearing began. The benches overflowed with spectators, politicians, rivals, curious citizens. At the center, Elias Kane, composed in his chair. Beside him, Nia Coleman, no longer hidden, no longer silent. The presiding judge struck the gavel. Case 22-147. Allegations of fraud and misrepresentation against Kane Logistics. We will hear both sides. Victor Langston's attorneys rose first, painting a portrait of corruption. Kane Logistics inflates donations. Their so-called charity launders money. And this woman, he pointed at Nia, is not a symbol of dignity. She is a con artist who sold dishes one year and bought pearls the next. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Cameras clicked, feeding on the humiliation. Nia's heart pounded, but her voice did not tremble when she stood. May I speak? She asked. The judge studied her, then nodded. You may. She stepped forward, the echoes of her heels filling the chamber. Yes, I was a dishwasher. I scrubbed plates for $2.13 an hour plus tips that rarely came. They want you to laugh at that. They want you to believe dignity depends on silk instead of soap. The courtroom stilled. I have no shame in labor. The shame belongs to those who exploit it. And if working with cracked hands makes me unworthy, then every cook, janitor, and cleaner in this nation stands accused beside me. A murmur surged through the crowd, some nodding, some shifting uncomfortably. She turned, her eyes burning into Victor and Kamsi. They claim I married for fortune, but when I met Elias, he had already been abandoned by her. Gasps filled the room as fingers pointed at Kamsi. Nia's voice sharpened like a blade. She left when he lost his legs. She chose comfort over loyalty. And now she dares return with lies? Kamsi leapt up. You ungrateful witch! You are nothing but a beggar! The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! But the damage was done. Every camera caught the venom dripping from Kamsi's mouth, her mask slipping for the world to see. Nia steadied herself, speaking softer now. But each word struck harder. Yes, I begged once. But even then I refused to steal, refused to bow to cruelty. Because poverty is not sin. Greed is. And greed, Your Honor, sits across this aisle smiling in silk. Elias's hand tightened on his wheels, pride swelling in his eyes. The judge leaned forward, thoughtful. The spectators no longer laughed. They leaned in, listening. Then came the twist. Nia pulled a folder from her bag, sliding documents onto the evidence table. These are the financial records of Langston Holdings. Transactions routed through offshore accounts identical to those they accuse us of. Except ours are for schools. Theirs? She let the silence hang before finishing. are for casinos." Gasps erupted. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning. Victor's face drained of color. Kamsi clutched her pearls. Eyes darting, the judge slammed the gavel. This evidence will be reviewed immediately. As the courtroom descended into chaos, one truth became clear. The smear campaign had collapsed under its own weight. The hunter had become the hunted. Nia turned to the cameras, her voice calm but cutting. "Let this stand as reminder. When you mock the labor of the poor, when you sell lies for profit, justice may take its time, but it does not forget." The words echoed beyond the marble walls, out into the streets, onto every screen. But if exposing lies rattles the empire, what happens when enemies decide that only blood will silence the truth? Victory in court should have brought peace. Instead, it lit a fuse. Kamsi and Victor had lost their case. Their names splashed across. Headlines: "Fraud exposed, charity smear." Backfires, investors withdrew, allies. Vanished. But greed does not die with shame. It mutates. In a penthouse overlooking the river, Victor poured whiskey with trembling hands. "They made fools of us," he hissed. "Cain's crippled empire should have collapsed. Instead, it stands taller." Kamsi's eyes blazed. "No, not taller. Vulnerable. The people love symbols, but symbols bleed too. If we can't break their names, we break their bodies." Victor froze, glass halfway to his lips. "You mean—" Her voice was ice. "Yes, an accident, a fire. Something that ends the lioness and the cripple once and for all." Across the city, Nia's intuition prickled. She stood on the balcony of the mansion, staring at the skyline, sensing storm clouds gathering beyond the glass towers. Elias wheeled beside her, his voice quiet. "You feel it too?" She nodded slowly. "They won't stop with shame. Men who worship money never stop until they hold a corpse in one hand and a contract in the other." He turned his chair to face her, his gaze steady. "Then we prepare, not with fear, with vigilance." The first strike came that night. An engine backfired outside the mansion, except it wasn't an engine. It was an explosion. A guard post at the east gate erupted in flames, smoke curling into the night sky. Alarms wailed. Security scrambled. Nia clutched Elias's shoulder, her pulse racing. "They've come!" Guards dragged in two masked men minutes later. One was bleeding, the other shouting. "They paid us! We didn't want blood!" It was Langston. Langston and that woman. Nia's heart hammered, fury rising. "Kamsi, she won't rest until we're ashes." By dawn, the news spread, attempted. Arson at Kane Estate. Masked men confessed to contract. Hit. Reporters camped at the gates. The city buzzed. With fear and fascination, Elias convened his legal team. "Let the law handle the fire," he said calmly, "but the greater battle is not in court, it is in the court of public opinion." Nia looked around the table, her voice firm. "Then I will stand with him again. Let them see not a victim, but a woman unafraid." That evening, she addressed the press on the mansion steps, cameras flashing like lightning. They tried shame. They tried lies. Now they try fire. But hear me. Flames cannot consume dignity. They only refine it. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some crying. Reporters shouted questions, but Nia's gaze cut through them like steel. If justice takes time, we wait. If enemies strike, we endure. But we will not kneel, not now. Not ever. Her words spread across the city like wildfire. Clips went viral within hours. Refined by flame trended worldwide. But in the shadows of the penthouse, Kamsi watched the speech on her tablet, her teeth grinding. She thinks she's untouchable. Let's see how she speaks when the fire is in her own room. Victor poured another drink, his face pale. "This is no longer business, Kamsi. This is war." The night of the Crescent City Children's Fund Gala was meant to be radiant. Crystal chandeliers glittered, orchestras swelled, and the city's elite arrived in gowns and tuxedos. But beneath the elegance lurked something venomous. Nia sensed it the moment she stepped onto the red carpet with Elias beside her. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions, yet her gut twisted. Danger breathed through the crowd like smoke before fire. Inside, speeches began. Politicians smiled for cameras, businessmen toasted champagne, and the orchestra hummed soft jazz. Elias wheeled forward to greet donors, his dignity unshaken. Nia moved with him, her smile poised but her eyes scanning every shadow. In the balcony above, two men adjusted their jackets, hidden inside, pistols. Their orders were clear: end the lioness first, then the cripple. Halfway through the gala, a senator announced, "Tonight, we honor Elias Kane and his wife Nia for resilience, for courage, for rebuilding hope where greed sought ruin." The applause thundered. Nia stepped onto the stage, her gown shimmering under the lights. Her voice rang through the hall. "Some called me Dish Girl. Some called me Beggar's Bride. But tonight I stand not as either. I stand as proof that no lie, no flame, no cruelty can bury the truth." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, shouting. The roar covered the faint click of safety sliding off upstairs. Then, chaos. A shot rang out, shattering a crystal sconce. Screams erupted. Guests dove beneath tables. Glasses shattered. The orchestra froze mid-note. Elias's guards surged, forming a wall around him. Nia froze under the blinding lights, the sniper's red dot hovering across her chest. Her heart pounded, but her voice did not break. "You want my silence?" she shouted into the chaos. "Then you'll have to kill me in front of them all." The room gasped. The dot wavered. Security stormed the balcony. 2 men wrestled the gunman to the floor as cameras rolled. The would-be assassins shouted as they were dragged out. "It was Langston! He paid us! He said finish what Velma started." The crowd erupted with fury, reporters scribbling, cameras blazing. Comsey and Victor, seated near the back, tried to slip out, but the eyes of 100 guests turned on them. "Isn't that his ex-fiancée?" someone whispered. "The woman who abandoned him? She funded this?" Kamsey's face drained, her facade crumbling. Victor grabbed her arm, but it was too late. Police stormed in, handcuffs gleaming under the chandeliers. Elias wheeled onto the stage, his face pale but resolute. He reached for Nia's hand, steadying her trembling fingers. And with the camera still rolling, his voice cut through the air. "They tried to bury us in lies. They tried to burn us in fire. And tonight they tried to silence us with bullets. But still, we rise." The audience surged to their feet again, clapping, shouting, chanting Nia's name. The roar drowned out the sirens as Kamsey and Victor were led away in chains. Later that night, safe in their mansion once more, Nia collapsed onto the balcony, breathless. Elias wheeled beside her, his hand covering hers. "You were fearless," he said softly. Her lips trembled. "I wasn't fearless. I was ready. If I had to fall, I would fall standing," he smiled faintly. "My lioness. Tonight you proved destiny bends but never breaks." Months passed after the gala, but echoes of that night lingered in every corner of Crescent City. The arrests of Kamsey and Victor dominated headlines, their trial exposing bribes, sabotage, even attempted murder for hire. They faced decades in prison. The empire they tried to steal had crumbled into ash, but one ghost still wandered free. Velma Price, she, was no longer the woman who strutted in silk, her nails clinking like coins. Neighbors now saw her stumbling through the street market, scarf frayed, muttering to herself. Her friends had vanished, her accounts were frozen, and the house she once lorded over was gone, seized as evidence of fraud. Some whispered she had grown thinner than a shadow. Others said she spent nights outside the church, begging scraps from the same hands she once mocked. It was justice, many said, but for Nia it was unfinished. One humid afternoon, Nia returned to the old neighborhood with Elias by her side. The convoy rolled slowly through streets she once walked with blistered feet. Children no longer taunted her, they waved. Neighbors whispered not in mockery, but in awe. When the SUV stopped, Velma stumbled from the church steps, eyes wide, lips trembling. She fell to her knees in the dust before the crowd. "My daughter," she croaked, voice raw. "I wronged you. I stole from you. I tore your letter, mocked your dreams, forced you into misery. I wanted your destruction. And yet, look at you now, a queen. Tears streaked her cheeks. Forgive me, Nia. Let me serve you. I will wash your floors, scrub your shoes, anything. Just don't leave me in this shame. The crowd held its breath, waiting for vengeance. Would the lioness strike? Nia stood tall, her gown simple, her eyes steady. Memories burned inside her, shredded paper, greasy sinks, laughter of dish girl. Every wound whispered for retribution. But then another voice rose in her heart. Her father's. Frail but clear, promise me you will not give up. Promise me you will be great. Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Her lips parted, her voice carried. I forgive you, Velma. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to chain my heart with your cruelty. Gasps swept the crowd. Some wept openly. Even Elias's hand tightened on his wheels. Pride shining in his eyes, Velma's body shook. You forgive me? Nia nodded. You tore my letter, but you did not tear my destiny. You mocked me as dish girl, but washing dishes is no shame. Exploiting others is. And that shame, Velma, is yours to carry, not mine. The crowd erupted in applause. Some shouted, Amen! Others clapped until palms stung. Velma collapsed, sobbing into the dust. Nia turned away, lifting her chin toward the sun. Justice had been served, and mercy had been chosen. That evening, back at the mansion, Elias wheeled beside her on the balcony. The city stretched before them, glowing like embers. You gave her what no court could, he said quietly. Mercy. Nia's eyes glistened, but her smile was steady. Mercy doesn't erase the past, but it frees the future, and mine will not be bound by her chains. She touched his hand, her voice soft. We rose from shame, Elias, not because of wealth, but because dignity outlasts greed, he nodded, his lips curving faintly. And because you are who you are, my lioness. If forgiveness can set even the deepest wounds free, what might happen if every buried dream dared to rise again? The first day of law school smelled of chalk and fresh ambition. The campus of Louisiana State University buzzed with voices, books clutched to chests, futures unfolding step by step. Among the crowd walked Nia Coleman Kane, no longer dish girl, no longer mocked bride, but a student, a daughter fulfilling a promise. She sat in the front row of her first lecture hall, her notebook open, her pen steady. The professor began with a question. Why do we study law? Murmurs rippled. Some whispered about careers, others about money. Nia raised her hand. To protect dignity, she said. Her voice carried across the hall. Because when dignity is stolen, law is the only blade sharp enough to cut it free. The room stilled. Heads turned. Some students whispered, Isn't that her? The one from the trial? The one who stood against her stepmother? Against Kamsi? Nia kept her gaze forward. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Promise me you will not give up. Promise me you will be great, she whispered under her breath. So quiet only her heart could hear. I kept my promise. Daddy. That evening, she returned to the mansion. Books still in her arms. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the balcony in gold. Elias wheeled toward her, his smile warm. How was the first day, my lioness? She laughed softly, eyes shining, terrifying, beautiful, everything I dreamed. He studied her, pride gleaming in his gaze. Do you realize what you've become? Nia tilted her head, teasing. What? A queen who carries textbooks instead of crowns? Elias shook his head slowly. No. You didn't need riches to prove yourself. You walked through fire and the fire crowned you. Her throat tightened, her eyes misting. She knelt before him, pressing her forehead gently to his. And you, Elias, you are my king. Together, we rule not with wealth, but with justice. Weeks passed, and the city began to see her not just as a survivor, but as a leader. She spoke at churches, at schools, at women's groups. Her words became mantras. They buried me in shame. But I rose in dignity. Poverty is not sin. Greed is. Queens don't beg for thrones. They are thrones. Clips of her speeches spread online, inspiring dishwashers, janitors, single mothers, orphans, anyone who had ever been mocked for their beginnings. To them, Nia was no longer just a symbol, she was proof. One night, as autumn winds swept through Crescent City, Nia stood again on the balcony with Elias at her side. The city lights glimmered like a crown at her feet. She whispered, almost to herself, "They thought a torn letter could end me. They thought dishwater would drown me. But paper burns, grease washes off. Dignity remains." Elias's hand found hers, and now the world knows it too. Together, they looked out at the skyline. Two survivors, two warriors, bound not by wealth, but by the fire of justice. The moral of their story spread far beyond Crescent City. True love is not built on money or beauty, but on courage and heart. Wickedness may rise like a flood, but destiny always lifts the righteous higher. And when God crowns you, no betrayal, no bullet, no enemy can remove your crown. If a torn letter could not end Nia's story, what torn dream in your own life might still be waiting to rise? And that is the journey of Nia Coleman Kane. From orphan to lioness, from dishwater to destiny, from shame to crown. If her story touched your heart, take a moment to give this video a like. It may seem small, but every click helps us keep telling stories the world is not meant to forget. If you're new here, subscribe and ring the bell, because on this channel, justice speaks, dignity rises, and every buried dream gets its resurrection. We thank you deeply for standing with us, for listening, for sharing. Your voice is part of this movement now. And trust me, what comes next will be even more powerful. Stories of resilience, of betrayal, of triumph against the odds. Stories that remind us wickedness may flood, but truth always floats. Until then, stay strong, stay just, and remember, queens don't beg for thrones, they are thrones.